Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Hansen, Chief Creative Officer at Unconquered, and I'm your host of Cultivating Purpose and Passion in Business. Thank you so much for listening in today. We have a great show. We're speaking with Coulter Lewis, co-founder and CEO of Sunday, a non-toxic lawn care brand. But before we kick things off, I want to put it out there that I need your help. Reviews are the best way that we can grow our audience, so please head on over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. I really hope that this has been an informative and inspiring podcast as you think about your business, yourself, and how it all rolls into creating a more purposeful and sustainable lifestyle. We only get one life, so let's find our best ways to live it.
Coulter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good to be here.
Yeah, I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about Sunday and what you guys are doing over there.
Sure. So Sunday is a direct-to-consumer brand that uses data, soil, climate to provide our customers with exactly what they need to care for their backyard without resorting to harmful pesticides. And
so you've been an entrepreneur. Would you say your whole life? Would you say this sort of been a part of your DNA?
Yeah, my whole life. I mean, this was always the plan. I don't know why, but I was just sure this is where I was going and what I would do.
Yeah, and before Sunday, you had another business that you still have it that you found with your wife. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. That's Quinn Foods, which is a CPG snack brand that you find in just about every grocery store at this point. But my working careers before that were always in service of building the tool set that I needed to be able to do this.
Yeah. And so, through your experience with Quinn and then starting on Sunday, how has that really influenced and helped you shape this new business?
It's really funny. My network people thought that lawn care, that's a huge shift. We're like, what are you doing? What's this 90-degree turn you're taking? And for me, it was a perfect progression. At Quinn, that brand really became a brand about ingredients, our food, how it's grown, who's growing it, and what the impacts are of that. And to the extent of us being in field with our growers very often, and working with them to reduce pesticide use, and also just being really inspired by them. I mean, it's just an incredible thing to be around and see that relationship they have with their land, and the process of making our food and just all the magic that happens there. So that became a big part of my life and my wife's life too. And when I started to look at this space, what I realized was that our backyards are actually our third largest crop by land area. So it's tied with wheat. It's 10 times more land than all other organic farms combined. So, when you start to put that lens on it, and if you care about the human health and environmental implications of agriculture, like this is a big, big piece of agriculture. And so that's what, that connection for me was just really strong. And it's what got me interested in the beginning.
Yeah, I never really looked at a lawn as a crop per se. It's just something that kind of always is an afterthought when you own a home. It's just there, the kids playing, you have the dogs are in it, and you have to cut it every week. That's kind of the extent of which I thought about a lawn, and never really thought of it as a crop. So it's a really interesting perspective. What led you to sort of reframe your perception of a yard into this?
I love the science side of all of this, and I really the plant science and the nutrient cycles and how all of this actually works is fascinating to me. And it was fascinating when I was getting into agriculture and learning about the rotation systems that our farmers use, and all of the it all goes back to the soil, right? And the living organisms in the soil, and how you create this symbiotic relationship rather than a dominant, brute force approach. And when you start looking at grass, you realize it's all the exact same mechanisms. All the dependencies are there. All of the environmental implications and the way we treat it is with the same products. It is a perfect continuation. We just don't think of it that way because we don't eat it. But outside of that, it is 100% a living organism that's dependent on another living organism, which is the soil, that's dependent on its caretakers to do the best it can. So it's just, to me, that connection was really clear.
So I imagine there's a big learning curve for you, at least from the science side, or you've worked in the food space before, and engineering and designing before, but now this is a whole new world as far as you're saying, dealing with climate, you're dealing with microorganisms, and creating microenvironments. So did you bring a team on to help with that? Did you just dive deep into research, or what was the process for that?
So it started with me just diving in as deep as I could and learning from every source I could find. And then, it didn't take very long to say, like, I'm not going to be an expert at this in a year. This is a lifetime of work to really understand all of this. And so I continue to focus on it, and I get as deep as I can to understand the science and all of the systems in place. But I did bring on a guy named Frank Rossie, who's now our chief science officer. And Frank is a professor at Cornell. He's a turf PhD. He's been a leader in the turf science space for decades. And also push for environmental change in this space. And I listened to Frank's podcast on turfgrass, and gave him a call, and he was generous enough to talk with me, and then we just built it from there. So he's been a huge part of us building the scientific rigor behind Sunday.
And so, was he your first hire?
Frank was, I think he was consulting for us, but I think probably one of the first paid members of the team. I would say one of the first few. Yeah.
I asked that because I always think it's interesting or a challenge for startups and new companies, brands. Like, who's that first person you hire and bring in? Who was that for you?
Well, at the beginning in 2018, we were doing testing and learning about the market, trying products in the wild with real consumers, and really understanding what Sunday needed to be. It was myself and two interns from CU.
Okay.
And Frank was then also helping, give us input and shape the science side of it. And then shortly thereafter, my brother joined, which was just a kind of a dream come true for me to be able to work together. It was really exciting. But we were, running as scrappy as we could to learn everything, to be able to figure out what Sunday was. And that year actually fundamentally changed the course of what the business became. The idea at the beginning was different.
And what was that catalyst for the change?
It was just this realization that no one knows anything about lawn care. And, I usually try to pull back from speaking in generalities, but that one's 99.98% true.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. There's no argument
but it's this truth, which shall not be spoken kind of thing, where there's the cultural pressures here where people feel like, if you're a man or if you own a house now, you're an adult, like these are things you should just know. But that's not really how knowledge works. And it is agriculture. Like, again, I spent a year trying to learn as best I could and still was like, I'm just cracking the surface. This is very complicated. And so, I talked to people during that year, and they would many, many times say the exact same thing, which is, I'm a little different. I don't know a lot about this. And they felt not only like incompetent and unable, but also alone. And to me, that was like, holy cow, this is, if I'm going to deliver value to our customers and be able to influence this change, like, this is the thing I need to tackle. And so that changed it from a product focused company to a company that's more focused on service and end-to-end experience. Which is, a fundamental shift in how we saw Sunday. And what's interesting is from that point forward, that thesis that kind of got built during that time is 100% intact. The things we wrote then are still as true today as they were. And I'm used to, having to rapidly change course and learn and adapt, but this has been just straight ahead.
Yeah, well, that's a really valuable insight. And I think people probably spent a lot of money on research or customer surveys to find out and get to that insight. How did you get to that insight? Were you getting people to the site and asking them to take a survey, or what was the process for that?
Yeah, we did a lot of things. We first of all, this became my life, right? And this was every conversation I had with every person that I ran into. It would eventually get to this topic, and we would dig into it. But then from a kind of a more deliberate side, we built a website for what Sunday was at that time. The idea, I think it was a Squarespace site. We made happen best we could. And then we would drive traffic to the site and drive them through a purchasing experience. And really what it looked like was they were going to buy some of the product. We felt like that was a good qualifier for the right kind of feedback, people who would go through that step. And then the last step, it was kind of like, oh, sorry, it's actually not for sale. But if you wouldn't mind taking the survey, that would help us, in a huge way. And we'd love to learn from you. And we had thousands of people take that survey. And then some of them end up becoming testers for us, and we actually sent them products and got feedback from them, and then we'd have regular phone calls with them and learn from them too. So we had kind of a mix of that quantitative, survey data, and then also this more qualitative conversation-based learnings too.
Yeah, that's a little risky. It seems like to get people to go through it, potentially off-put, or maybe people feel frustrated that they went in with the intention of buying and then kind of put a survey in front of them. Did you incentivize, or what was your thought about that? Were your early sort of conversations?
I was worried about it. Just like, I had the same intuition you had that, gosh, this feels like a little bit disingenuous. I don't love this moment we're creating, but like, if they believe in what we're building and we all think that this direction we're trying to build for the space matters, we need this. And so that enabled us to push toward like, okay, let's just start trying and see what happens. And we didn't see that frustration and anger. I think I'm not exactly sure why, but I think people were just excited about what they saw, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, they can empathize with someone building an idea, and so there actually wasn't frustration.
Well, what I love about that approach and insight is it not only does it help sort of reframe how you're doing your business, but how you talk to your customers. Has that affected you, or do you find yourself using that information now and putting it into your marketing and customer outreach?
Yes, absolutely. Fundamentally, I think I came from with building the brand Quinn and building it like literally in a Whole Foods, handing out samples every weekend, hoping to pay my mortgage. Like that's the situation where I had a lot of things kind of burned the neural pathways in my head. And, that started with, this is why we're so proud of our ingredients, right? And we really want to lean into that foundation and the integrity we built around how the product was made. And then what you learn in that moment when you're face to face with the customer really quickly, it's like you've got to meet their near-term needs. And then food, it's got to taste good. Like none of those are all nice things if it tastes good and it meets that need for me. And so I just saw that in a really visceral way. And so I took that same lens to Sunday, especially when we're doing this research phase of like, okay, we're going to matter as a company. We're going to have like, that's why I'm doing this. Right. And so we're going to have this foundation of trying to drive for a better future. But how do I make that relevant to my customers across the country? And especially when I'm thinking about a category which is the most exciting part for me was that we weren't targeting coastal millennials. We're targeting everybody else. And so just making sure we're thoughtful about that person, where they are and what they need.
And, speaking of messaging, one of the things I really found interesting on the site and something we touched on earlier in our conversation before we hopped on the line is about the idea of sustainability. It's not a huge part of the language you're using. And I appreciate that. There's so much greenwashing today. It can really come off as disingenuous or inauthentic, not being really authentic to the brand. But I do see this as a sustainable product, as an earth-friendly product. What was the mindset behind, sticking to ingredients and the benefits of using it versus it being like a sustainable?
I think for us, it's thinking about, again, that end user, what their needs are today, and how many layers we're adding on top of that. And so when you start talking about the impact of your little lawn as a broader subset of this enormous amount of land in the country and how it impacts waterways, like you're very many layers away from that person at that point.
Yeah.
And I think that as a society, we're getting much, much better at interpreting those needs, which aren't directly in my backyard, and adjusting my spending to be able to support a better future at a grand scale. But it is, for us, there is so much to talk about focused on you and your family and that small little system that's more impactful and still drives the same change. And so it's really about finding, like, internally, our intention as a brand and the change we're trying to bring about is X. The way we talk about it to our customers is a little bit different, right? And it's making sure that we make that relevant to them.
And so you've approached your business as a direct-to-consumer. It's a subscription model. Can you walk me through what it would be like for a new customer to come on to your program?
Yeah, absolutely. So you would go to getsunday.com and enter your home address. That's the first thing we ask for from our customers. And we use that to pull a whole bunch of data on your environment so that we understand what the right solution is for your property. And so this would contrast with, I think before we get into this, maybe talk about what exists today. Right now, you'd go to your local home improvement store. There would be racks and racks of big stacks of chemicals. You can smell it from 30 feet away. And you'd be covering your property in approximately 5 times more pesticides per acre than industrial farms use. So the current lawn care practices are absolutely bonkers. And they're also, it's just brute force, one size fits all, dominate this thing to, bend it to your will, which doesn't really work in nature. I think we all kind of know that. Nature usually wins. So, in contrast to that, again, you go to our website, put your address in, we'll show you an image of your home and then also data on the soil that's in your area, the makeup of that soil, your 30-year historical weather, recent weather, then ask a few questions, learn more about you and how you use your lawn and what your goals are. And all of that is then used to create a plan, which is for nutrients for your property. Behind the scenes, what we're doing is we're actually modeling grass growth based on environmental conditions. We know when it's coming out of dormancy, when it's in heat stress, all these kinds of things. And what we adjust for our customers is what you're going to get. So we have 13 different nutrient profiles that we can send, and they change throughout the year. How much of it you get, and then when you're putting it on. And those 3 variables make basically an infinite number of potential outcomes. One quick note. So after you've signed up, a little bit more happens. We then buy aerial imagery of your home, which is very high resolution, allows us to actually trace out your lawn. So your lawn advisor will do that for you. And you can image your house, say, this is a lawn area that I recognize. How does this look? And by the way, I'm your lawn advisor. I'm here for any challenges or any questions you have. And then one step beyond that, when you do get your first box, it contains a soil test. And this is an optional thing that we present to our customers, but the vast majority of them do it, which was just amazing for us because we're asking them to dig a hole in their yard, which we thought was a big ask. So they put a small bit of soil in a baggie in the mailbox, goes back to our lab, and we run an analysis on it. And through that, we now have by far the world's largest residential soil database, and we can now start to understand regional trends and what's happening in all of our backyards across the country.
So that's very technical. It's not as technical as I thought it would be. I'm sorry. I should say it's more technical than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And I'm curious you mentioned an advisor, and I'm curious to if there's an overlap between artificial intelligence and software and like an actual human being in there, and how have you sort of negotiated that?
So, just a quick note on the technical side of it. I actually, when I talk about it, I get really technical because I'm excited about all the science. I love it. Yeah. But for our customers, the message we're sending is, hey, we've got your back. You don't need to be a lawn care expert because we are.
Exactly.
And you're going to get what you need when you need it, hose it on. And if you ever have a question, you got someone to call. And so that science is really not shown to the customer for the most part. It's mostly just there to support them, empower them. And in terms of how we support them and how the mix of technology and real people there, I think it's both. We're, again, like the tech team here is one of our biggest teams. We're diving deeper and deeper into translating all the data we have into actionable advice for our customers real time. Yeah. And so those tools are continually launching and being built, but there will always be a human component to the support as well. We offer one-on-one consultations, which is free, and people will go through and talk about their challenges. And what's been amazing is, I think if you'd asked me in early 2019 what I was worried about that idea of being able to build a customer service team that had the expertise to actually deliver on that. And they're incredible. I mean, it's just amazing to see how much they've learned. They do weekly classes to learn about what's happening in the country right now, weather-wise, and what weeds are happening and soil conditions. Yeah. And so they truly can be that expert for our customers.
Yeah. And what does I thought the licensing aerial photo is really interesting. Not something I considered. How does that help with your data processing?
It's far more accurate. So for one thing, when you have the free versions of that imagery, you really not, from the contract perspective, not allowed to pull data off it. You can't make measurements and things like that. That's not allowed.
Gotcha.
And so it allows us to then actually pull information off that person's property to do things like how much lawn area do you have, and we do driveway salt, things like that too, like how much of that area do you have, and what shade issues might you have. So there's a lot of information to pull from that imagery that we wouldn't get otherwise. It's also imagery that is it's taken typically in populated areas about 3 times a year, so we can actually start to see what's been going on in that property over the past few years.
And
it's high enough resolution where we can see pet spots, for example. Like I can tell if you have a dog right away.
That's amazing. This part of it is really fascinating to me, and I'm curious. Was this an early idea when you were thinking of Sunday and how you can differentiate yourself, or was this stuff that sort of evolved and became relevant or an opportunity as you went further down the road?
This all came out of that the realization and awareness of the lack of ability and confidence in the consumer. Yeah. And it was like, okay, so given that this is a fundamental thing that it's really difficult to solve for, what is everything we could bring to bear here to make that person feel confident and empowered to be able to do this?
Yeah.
And so that resulted in us just leaning as heavily as we could into basically ag tech. And building that out front on the backyard scale. So that's when that got cemented, and it hasn't changed since then. It's only just deepening for us.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, this almost sounds like a technology company in some ways, and I'm really curious to how. I mean, there's a lot of value in that, not just in like the home space, but you large scale farming, food development. I mean, who knows? Maybe it could be used in developing countries where there's food scarcity, famine. I'm really curious how that can be applied long term. I'm not necessarily asking you to respond to that, but I just thinking out loud how the potential down the road could be. I think that's pretty interesting and incredible.
Yeah, I think if you look at whether or not Sunday's a player in this or not, it's something I definitely can't speak to today. We have a lot of acreage to solve for right now, just looking at the American backyard. But if you think about the impact of better agricultural practices on the environment as a whole, not even don't use pesticides or any of these kind of more binary things, but just more refined practices that are responding to the current conditions and not what I did last year or what I've done for the last 100 years. That has an enormous impact across the world. Yes. I mean, I think you're alluding to that, but that need is there for sure.
Yeah. And so going back to the idea of, you are a direct to consumer brand. And what I find interesting about that term is some brands, it's more of a distribution than it is like baked into their model. Where this seems like I have a hard time seeing how this would work in a Home Depot or a hardware store. It seems like if you were ever to go on a brick and mortar, you would need to have your own stores. Do you plan on extending into like a brick and mortar, or you plan on just sticking to be an online business?
We not only do we actually did launch in Walmart this year, and so we had to go through that work of how do we translate all this. What we're selling on our website again is not products. We're selling an end-to-end experience. We're selling a solution. It's something very different than what you find on a shelf at a store. And I think we're going to continue to refine how we can bring more of that value that we have on D2C onto the shelf. The primary focus for us in our launch is that we basically created a store within the store. And so trying to make this as approachable as possible. It's a category where just a tiny fraction of people, I mean, it's enormous category, but a lot of people walk by this, this part of the store intimidated and just like, this is not for me. It's too much, too complicated. Maybe I'll hire somebody. Maybe I'll just do nothing. And so our intent with the way we present our shelf is like, no, you can do this. We've made it really easy. These are exactly the right things for this area and your property. And just get out there and get started and get your hands dirty. And we think that beginning of the journey is just really, really powerful, bringing new people in the market. And
so this year, you received a Series A funding. That's incredible. Congratulations on that. How are you using that investment now to grow?
Thank you. Yeah, and actually, it was actually a Series B.
Series B. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And that was with Sequoia, who've just been absolutely incredible and see this broader vision and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I couldn't be more happy with everybody who's been an investor in the business. It's been amazing. We hope to accomplish with that is we have a lot to build. To be honest, this is. I'm really excited about the pieces that we have in place and the traction we're seeing. But when I think about this broader market and how much there is to do, we are just scratching the surface. And so a lot of that's building team and capacity and capabilities here, especially on the tech side and also on the creative side. And it's also, expanding the offering of what Sunday can do for you outside your home. So those are the primary investments.
And so, as you think about how you're going to apply this investment across the board, um, you know, it seems like a daunting task almost, because you get a bunch of cash and you're like, now what? And how do you prioritize? How are you figuring out where money should be? And just also as someone who has not gone through the investment cycle of raising money, how does that work with your actual investors? Do they want to see a plan to see where that money's going?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I've definitely been in the seat before where it was incredibly daunting. More so in early stages of Quinn, where it was like, what we have right now is kind of working. How do we expand, and where are these dollars going to go to make the most use? I think what's a little bit different in this scenario and the stage of the business and traction we're seeing is like, we have a use for it. I mean, there's so much to build and so much value that's just right around the corner. We're in a market that really hasn't seen change in half a century. It's literally the same brand selling the same products. And it's the same size market as like the US cosmetics industry or footwear in the US. Like, it's a huge consumer facing market with just some old school brands doing the same old thing for the most part. And so, the amount of reinvention that we want to be able to do, it's not like we don't have the ideas for how to go build important things. We have too many, maybe. And I think just in terms of their expectations, and for people who haven't been through that process before, like that's 100% part of that funding and process and conversation is like, here's what I think we need to build, and what I think what's going to really, really matter long term, and where we need to go. And if they don't agree with that, then they're the wrong partner. Or they're right and you should listen. But for me, it's incredibly important that we align on that longer term vision of what we need to build, and that's a key part of the process for me.
Yeah. One of the, we have a wide variety of businesses on here, from startups to brands that have been somewhat established. But a lot of them are in their earlier infancy. And a common theme is dealing with manufacturers and supply chain and suppliers, and, being a startup and not having the leverage of having huge orders. And so I'm curious to how, you've gotten your suppliers and your team on board there to take you seriously and start giving you the materials and supplies you need.
It's so challenging, by the way, for anybody listening who's living through that. That's pretty much universal. And I always thought of it as like you're batting with a heavy bat in the beginning because you're so disadvantaged. And if you can still move forward, that really says something. For me, something I fundamentally learned at Quinn and through being an entrepreneur, I thought I would love every piece of it and be good at every piece of it. And both those things are not true. And the operational side of it is where I have the greatest weakness. And so one of the first hires, a guy named Jay Valesco, who's our VP of operations, and incredibly strong in operations. And that was, to me, fundamental to be able to build the business we needed, because I knew I couldn't fill in there. And what Jay's done is built an incredibly strong team. And honestly, it's just a lot of work to get these things in place. We've made about 20 new items every year, which in our space is beyond unheard of, especially because we have to register every single product in every single state. There's an enormous regulatory challenge in our business. And it's just down to them. There's no shortcuts, just working really, really hard and, pushing. In the early days, we were, trying to find our original manufacturers. And these are companies that haven't seen a new customer in decades. And so, they're very, very skeptical, really challenging to break through and find people that could believe and trust in us. And definitely there were periods where it was like, maybe that person doesn't exist and we can't launch this. But we ended up finding great partners.
So when you say there's a lot of regulation, what is that around?
So the fertilizer and pesticide markets are regulated for home and for farm in exactly the same way. And so, for a variety of reasons, that's resulted in a lot of complexity. So for the fertilizer side, it's regulated at the state level. So that means every single state has to approve every single product. And that's not just a check the box type of thing. That's a real approval process. And each state has their own rules. So that makes it exponentially more challenging. And then from anything that would fall in a pesticide category, even if it's organic, then the EPA manages that. And that's then you're going through, obviously dealing with large organizations like the EPA and working through those processes is expensive and slow. But so there's a lot of moving pieces there.
So are you are people able to buy your product across the US right now?
They are. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I imagine that was one of the earlier things you did before you were selling to consumers.
Well, it was one of those things where, you imagine, you think about the company and the core competencies you need. And for me, I focus on our ability to deliver an incredible experience for our customers. But there's these tactical pieces, like we need to be good at regulation, which is not something I would ever imagine. But the better we are at that, it's just like this. It's a lever for us. It's really powerful to be good at that, and it's hard. So we built the capabilities to be able to run that process and do it well.
Yeah, it's a lot. I never thought of that, and it just definitely adds another layer of complication to the whole process. And I'm curious to how your customers are finding you. You know, are they looking for alternatives and healthier, or I should say safer home care products, or are you grabbing their attention in another way?
So we find our customers through a variety of different channels and different methods. A lot of it was referrals, been a new channel for us. It's growing in a huge way. It's really exciting, but also traditional Facebook marketing, audio, podcast, that kind of thing. And I think it's generally not people who are in the market for this. You know, our customer isn't really someone who's been doing, the name brand thing for a few years and looking to switch. It's much more around activating a new person. And so it's someone who's like, I know I should be doing something out there, but that's too complicated. And that's still so much poison. Like, I'm just not even going to participate. And I think that's the person that we're able to bring in and get them activated and get them to, outside their home and starting to care for their land, which is a good start.
Yeah, I definitely fit into that category because, I look at I live in New York right now, but we're contemplating moving into outside the city, and of course we'll have a yard. We have dogs. I'm actually looking forward to the space, but I find myself, like I don't want to pour all that stuff on my lawn. I don't want to pour chemicals on it. It seems like it does more damage than good all to have nice grass. So I definitely fit into that.
Just to reinforce that a little bit, sometimes it's worth having just a couple of stats because it isn't imagined, right? This is very real.
Yeah.
When they ran tests, they tested people's for presence of 2,4-D, which is a pesticide in their bloodstream. 80% of Americans had it in their blood. That's the ingredient in weed and feed. They're getting it from their lawn, and it's in their home, which has also been measured by Cornell, and then it's in their bodies too. So these things you put on your property are not just on the grass; you're living with them at that point.
Yeah. So is that speaking to then a younger audience, or do you find yourself 50s, 60s as well, age brackets?
So we definitely have a long tail, and we cover a huge range of ages, but we focus mostly on 30 to 40 would be the age group that we see the most traction with, which is really exciting for us. And what it really looks like in a more personal way is it's young families buying their first home a lot of times, looking to build that home in their own vision and feel great about it. And that's, to be a part of that is, for me, is so special.
Yeah, it really. I can see why it would be. So one of the things that we talked about earlier was really that you don't have a ton of, I guess you say, messaging around the sustainable aspect of your product, but you do participate with organizations like 1% for the Planet. So I would love to hear how you're working with them and what kind of organizations you're supporting, and if there are any others, certifications that you go through to help, create some accountability for your brand and product.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different areas where we think about sustainability or impact as a company. I mean, fundamentally, the mission, the products we create are to solve that problem, right? And so, on a per yard basis or a total basis, we've taken, I think at this point, over 100,000 pounds of pesticides out of the environment.
Wow.
And so an enormous reduction in the amount of use of these kinds of compounds, which we feel are not a good thing for people or the planet. And so the product is designed to solve that problem in the service and everything else. And then outside of that, we do additional things. So 1% for the Planet, proud to be part of that. We direct most of those funds toward preservation of tallgrass prairie in the U.S. Just something that, that there's 4% of that left compared to where it was. It's a special piece of our heritage. And so, it feels like it's also your lawn's big brother, and it's a good thing to take care of it. And then other organizations like Audubon Society, Xerces Society, so that's for birds and for insects, and other local things like Austin Park Society, which helps clean up parks around Austin. And we have a pretty wide net in terms of how we use those funds, but all kind of focus on things like that. And then reduce plastic use. We use a pouch format for our product rather than a bottle because it's less than half the plastic. We're weaving it into everything we do. And I wouldn't say we're perfect. Like there's more and more. We work on it every day to get better and better.
Yeah, and I think as we wrap, you've given us some really fantastic insight into your business, how you've built it, some of the obstacles and considerations you've had to make. But I would love to hear. It's a very emotional process. It's a labor of love. You talked about earlier, stressing about paying the mortgage. Emotionally, there's that whole side of it. And I'm really curious, so in closing, if you could talk through, what you do to stay positive, keep your team feeling positive, and keeping that, the eye on the prize.
It's challenging. And I think I would just start with that. I'm definitely not always at my best, and sometimes it does get you. And when we first started Quinn's, I had to reflect back on that period too. It was so exciting. And I was so close to it that I wrote every single high all the way to the top and every single low all the way to the bottom. And it was beyond unsustainable. It destroyed me. It was just too much. And so I think through just their survival instinct over time, I learned to not ride either of those too far. And be able to find an average there a little bit. And also, I think what I saw at Quinn was a lot of moments where it's like, oh, this is it. Something has fallen apart, and it might be maybe that's everything, and it wasn't. And we always found a way forward. And so that understanding and having seen that happen helps me stay positive when things are challenging. And I think, so all of that aside, the thing that helps me and the team stay positive and push and work through the harder challenges is that I think we all know what we're doing is important. The team is incredibly aligned on the mission at Sunday and why it matters, the impact we're having. And so that's just a really strong unifying thing for everybody here. And helps you dig deep and fight through. It's really like, yes, we're a business, we need to hit our numbers, we need to do all those sort of things. But we have something stronger to rally around than just top line. We have something we really think matters.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great advice. I know the reason why I always ask is I think it's one of those unspoken things between entrepreneurs, or when people are considering opening their business. There's that whole side of it's a marathon. How do you prepare yourself to make it through and ride the ups and downs? And
I think there's a bit of a disservice done sometimes too, where there's a template for the entrepreneurial story.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like we started, it was hard, then this thing happened, and then it was amazing. And that's not a true story. Yeah. I've talked to so many founders, and they fight really hard all the way through, and they deal with a lot of personal worry and issues and things like that. It is 100% part of it. So you do need that to fortify and have that strength. It's hard. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you for your candor and all the transparency you provided in the creation of the company. I think you guys have some awesome things ahead. I'm really excited to see how the tech side of your business is going to grow and potentially even spill over into other parts of agriculture that we spoke about. I think that's really exciting. So congratulations with everything, and thanks again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. That was fun.
Welcome.
Next week, we have Sarah Piaget-Yu, CEO and founder of Blueland, a D2C brand creating non-toxic cleaning products that aim to reduce plastic waste. We're going to talk through startup life, how to vet investors, and the importance of certifications with expert agencies, among other things. If you haven't already, please head on over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review, or email me, jay@weareunconquered.co. See you next week.